In this video, I'll provide a practical example of using Angular RxJS operators by building a small app that utilizes the NASA API to fetch and showcase space-related data. Out of the multiple open APIs offered by NASA, I chose 3 of them: the astronomy picture of the day, the Earth Observatory Natural Event Tracker, and the NASA image and video library. Here is the final result. Using the picture of the day API, we are going to show a single picture by selecting a date, or multiple pictures for a selected range of dates, or just a number of random pictures. Using the image and video library, we are going to search for some terms and have a list of results displayed. And finally, for the UNet API, we are going to make a form to retrieve different natural events around the globe. We'll start by creating a new Angular project using ng-new command and leave it to run in the background using ng-serve. Then generate 3 components for each API that we are going to use: AOPD, library, and Earth. Next, open the app routing module and create the 3 routes for previously created components and the default redirect. We are going to install Font Awesome for some icon usage, and Tailwind CSS and Angular Material for styling different components, although these two don't really go together in a live project. Tailwind needs to be configured in tailwindconfig.js and styles.css. In appcomponent.ts, we are going to create 3 icon properties that will be used in the template. In the template, we are going to leave space for the router outlet on the right and create a sidebar on the left using a bunch of Tailwind classes. Put a title on the sidebar NASA API and add a list of 3 items for each of the routes created before. Using router links, create a route for each list item and add some classes for the active link using router link active directive. Let's go to localhost 4200 and test the app so far, and everything seems to work fine. Now generate 3 new components for each tab inside the APOD page. In app.html, use each of these 3 inside the mat tab component. For the mat tab components to work, we need to import mat tabs module in app module. For some of the APIs, we need a key that we can get by completing a form on the NASA website. Let's grab that key and put it inside our Angular environment. Then, generate a new service named NASA APOD. Go to the service and inject the HTTP client in the constructor. At the top of the component, define 2 properties: the API key imported from the environment and the base URL for the picture of the day endpoint. Then create a new method getAstronomy picture of the day that will return an observable. Inside the method, define the URL and HTTP options, in our case the date parameter. Then return the result of calling the get method from the HTTP client using the URL and options. We need to import the HTTP client module so the requests will work. To work with dates, we will use moment library. Inside the first app TypeScript file, we will inject the service we just created and define a set of properties: astronomy picture to hold the data, error message in case anything wrong happens, date, the input which will be sent to the endpoint, min and max date for the input, and a APOD subscription for the observable. Then create a method to retrieve the picture of the day. First, we reset the picture and then assign the subscription to be the result of calling the service method with date argument, which is the formatted value of the date input. We use the RxJS pipe method to perform multiple operations on the observable. First, we use tab to log the received data. Tab operator is used for performing side effects in an observable chain without affecting the stream of the data itself. Then we use the catch error operator to handle errors from the HTTP call and reset our error property if it happens. Finally, we use map operator to retrieve only necessary data from everything we receive. By calling the subscribe method, we provide 2 callbacks. Next, where we get the astronomy picture and reset the error, and error where we again update the error property from the component. We call this method on the initialization of the component and every time the date input changes. To handle the second one, we will subscribe to value changes of the input. In the end, we need to unsubscribe from the service on component destroy. For the date picker with moment, we need to install the material moment adapter and update the app module by importing mat moment date module, mat form field module, and mat date picker module. Let's also import some other modules which will be used later: mat input module, mat select module, and mat button module. For the date picker, we set some additional settings like parsing the date as UTC and defining custom display and parse format. In the HTML template, we will combine Tailwind and material elements to create a date picker input at the top, followed by a block where we show the title, date, explanation, and the picture of the day itself if we have no errors. Otherwise, we display the error. Let's look at the intermediate result. Looks beautiful. For the range request, we need to create another method in the service, which will differ by the parameters we send to the API. In the picture range component, let's build a similar structure to the single image component. The only difference in properties will be that the date now becomes a range of type form group with two values, start and end. The method to get the data will call the service and pipe a series of operators. Tap to log the data, catch error to handle eventual errors, match map, although a simple map will also do the trick to reverse the data so the latest dates will go first, take to limit the number of results returned, to array and map in order to return only the necessary properties from the whole objects sent by the API. On next callback, update the astronomy pictures property, and on error callback, update the error property. On component init, let's call this method and also subscribe to value changes or the range form group. So anytime the range changes and both dates are valid, we call the method again. On destroy, we should unsubscribe from the observable. In the HTML template, we again use a combination of Tailwind and Angular material. On top, create a material date range input, and on the bottom, for each result from the API, create a block that will contain title, date, explanation, and the picture. And now let's check the results. For the last tab of the picture of the day API, we need to create another method in the service where we update the HTTP params once again. In the picture range component, initialize a form control with 1 as default value, an error message, the pictures array, and the random picture subscription. The method to get random pictures will call the service method and use the same operators as before in pipe. Tap to log the data, catch error for error handling, and map to retrieve only necessary fields. On next callback, update the pictures array property, and on error, update the error property. Of course, we should always unsubscribe on destroy. In template, create a number input and a button which will call the getRandomPictures method on click. Below these inputs, let's again display the title, date, explanation, and picture for each result. And of course, let's look at the result again. For the Images and Video Library API, we'll create a new service. This API does not require an API key. So in the service, we inject the HTTP client and set only the API URL property. The getResults method takes two arguments, search term and the page number that can also be null. We define the params with search and append the page if it is not null. Then call the get method using the URL and the options with the HTTP params. Let's look at the response data. We have an href field that contains a list of other links which can be images, videos, or other collections. Let's go back to the service and define the new method to get the results of this collection. It will be a simple method that will call the HTTP client get with the URL taken from the argument. In the component, we inject the library service and create a search term subject, search results observable, search form control, link, and metadata which will be stored from the results fields. On init, we subscribe to the value changes of the input and call the next callback of the search term subject. This subject will have a pipe which will update the results observable. So in the pipe, we first stream the search term. Then we filter it and make sure there is no request sent if the data is empty. Next, we apply a debounce so the user can type multiple letters without sending a request for each change. The distinct until changed makes sure a duplicate value does not result into a new request. Tap to log the data, switch map to switch to a new observable if a new value is emitted. The next observable will be the call to the API. After that, we log the result again using tab and set the links and metadata properties from the result fields. Next, using merge map, let's update the date property and preview image for each item. We also want to call the getLinks collection for each item. Because of the async nature of the HTTP request, we need to make sure we wait for all the collections. And this is why we use fork join operator. In the template, create a new text input that will hold the search for control. And below it, using the async pipe, display all items from the search results, with preview image, title, keywords, date created, description, and collection properties. If there are no results, display a ng template with that text. And of course, let's test the component using some astronomy terms. Let's create a new service for the third API called UNet. This API also does not require an API key. In the service, we define the base URL and create the three methods: fetch categories and fetch sources that will be used to add values to some select fields, and fetch events that will have a series of arguments. Each argument will be added to HTTP params if it is valid. In the end, return the get call to the URL with the assigned option params. Before we move to the component, let's create two interfaces for the category and source. In the component, inject the UNet service and form builder. Define categories and sources array properties, event filter form, server error, event results, and event subscription. In the constructor, let's create the structure for a filter form using the form builder API. The getEvents method will parse values from this form and call the service. After the result comes back, use the map operator to parse the results as JSON. In next callback, assign the result to the events property, and in the error, assign the server error property. Now let's create two methods that will fetch the sources and categories using the service and assign the results to the corresponding component properties. These methods will be called onInit. Again, don't forget to unsubscribe on Destroy. In the template, create a form using material select field, input field, and date picker. Under the form, display the event results using the JSON pipe if there is no error. Otherwise, display the error itself. In the end, let's look at the result. That's it for this video. The end result is a small app that uses Angular RxJS to fetch data from different NASA APIs.